improvements, which I'll touch further. And also we helped further the Poplar Park with Mayor Cilento, who worked with the Borough Council and the Dunellen Arts Commission, and really community input and community gathering to develop the Poplar Park on Prospect Avenue, North Avenue. And as mentioned, public strategy for revitalization, it's an ongoing process. And that's why these community meetings are important, to hear back the feedback, to hear the understanding, and further to guide the development and direction for redevelopment in Dunellen. This is the Survey Monkey. It's an image of the survey. These are some of the questions. For example, what type of uses would you like to see in downtown? So we had over 25 questions, I believe, and from this we got a good feedback in terms of the impression and the guidance direction from the community. So, what does a redevelopment plan mean? It creates a vision for the downtown. As Mayor Cilento mentioned, there's 4 different sites. There's the north side train station, the south side train station, the Dunellen station, which is our color, and the remaining parcels on North Avenue, primarily North Avenue from Plainfield to the Middlesex border. It promotes, spurs redevelopment, rehabilitation, and it guides and controls the development for the downtown. So you have zoning, but in this case, a redevelopment plan supersedes the zoning. The redevelopment plan determines what permitted uses are permitted there. It determines the architectural standards. That any development that comes in has to meet these architectural standards. It determines the building height. And also the redevelopment plan required streetscape improvements. So all these new developments are going to see improved streetscape elements along North Avenue or frontage of wherever the redevelopment plan is. It also requires parking. It makes the parking requirements, and also minimum unit size for units. This is the map that Mayor Cilento touched on. There's 4 different sites. The site 1 is on the north side of the train station. Site 2 is the south side of the train station. Site 3 is our color site, and the remaining parcels are from the Plainfield to Middlesex border, primarily on North Avenue. So we're making progress. We did, based on community feedback and based on development, we made some redevelopment plan amendments. We required on-site parking for all new residential developments. Previously, new developments were able to, if they're under 20,000 square feet, were not required to provide on-site parking. So we made a requirement that all residential requires on-site parking. We did a payment in lieu of parking, and that stands for a pilot. So if a developer cannot provide on-site parking, a developer pays a fee for each parking spaces or leases of parking spaces in municipal private parking lot. So we want to make sure the developers that come here provide the required parking that supports the residential and the commercial. So we did the pilot to make sure that if they don't provide the required parking, the borough will receive a payment in lieu. And also we want to foresee for the future. We made a requirement for electric vehicle charging stations. As we're going to see more and more EV cars, we want to make sure that the borough has the necessary infrastructure to support these electric vehicles. This is some pictures from the Poplar Park. It was really great to see that taking an underutilized parking lot and making it a public space, having music there, having art there, having a community gathering space. So from the survey, 91% wanted to see a new public space. So the mayor and council listened to that recommendation and took the initiative in working with the community and developing this pop-up park. And I hope it comes back every year, because I think it's been very successful, and I like to see it further, and I'm sure the borough and mayor and the community like to see that as well.
No, just to interrupt real quick, we also highlighted several different businesses each Saturday at the events that were hosted there.
And he also had ping pong. So having those type of activities really activates a space and brings people downtown. And from the people coming downtown, they support the local business. So we're making progress. Besides the Dunellen station, there's smaller projects that have been approved. This one was approved by the planning board. It's 150 North Avenue. It was approved for 14 residential units with on-site parking. This one is for 390 North Avenue, the old Chicken Holiday building. There are site improvements to the site and facade improvements, and also there's going to be some outdoor dining. This other one was approved, was 440 North Avenue. This one is right next to the Quick Check, and this is for 9 residential units. So besides having the larger development, you have the smaller scale development along the North Avenue corridor, and this will supplement the larger scale, but also increase pedestrian movement, increase the population within downtown to support the businesses. So what does redevelopment mean? Redevelopment means a lot of things, but in my opinion, redevelopment means new residents support downtown businesses. It creates new businesses. All these new spaces, the 150 North Avenue has 2 commercial spaces. The 440 North Avenue has one commercial space. So it creates opportunities for new businesses to come. And they see these new attractive buildings that they want to locate in downtown Dunellen. It promotes continued redevelopment, rehabilitation. Developers see the progress. They see the progress in downtown. They see the progress surrounding. It attracts further development. But the development is controlled by the redevelopment plan, so it has to meet the guidelines that's set forth in the redevelopment plan that was crafted with community input. It continues streetscape improvements. You'll see North Avenue and other redevelopment properties continuing the streetscape improvements. It increases property value of downtown. It's been proven that more further development will increase property value. And from this, it will increase tax revenue for Dunellen. But as mentioned, this is an ongoing process, and it will continue, but you have to continue with the goal and the strategy and the direction for the borough. So what's next for Dunellen? We're going to, as Mayor mentioned, further appropriate redevelopment opportunities with redevelopment that fits the scale of Dunellen. There'll be continued growth, redevelopment, rehabilitation of downtown. There'll be increased tax ratables. There'll be improvements to Dunellen and the downtown. Positive branding. People see the growth. They see the growth. They hear about the growth. So this is a branding of downtown Dunellen. And then, as Mayor mentioned also, there's upcoming amendments to permit breweries, distilleries, wineries, and all redevelopment areas. And if prospective breweries see that it's permitted, this will attract these types of businesses there, because otherwise they don't know if it's permitted or not. So having these type of businesses, which have been proven to be successful to the downtown, they'll know that this will be attractive to locate, hopefully, in downtown Dunellen. There's also going to be art and mural initiative that's ongoing with Rutgers and the Blaustein School. And then there's going to be the master plan re-examination report, which is going to be community driven. So all this ties together into the development of Dunellen and creates and crafts the right direction. So thank you for the mayor, thank you for the mayor and council, and thank you for everyone hearing tonight. And I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of this downtown development.
So before I introduce the next speakers, I want to touch on something that Gabe did note, which is revenue and ratables. And that's something that needs to be stressed for people who may have concerns over redevelopment in the downtown. Dunellen's tax base is 85% based upon residential value. So that is a significant amount on the taxpayer. So by creating the redevelopment in the downtown, that will be additional ratables and revenue into the town that will assist in alleviating the property taxes on the residential component of our tax bracket. So it's an important point to make and to stress. So with that, I would like to introduce Charles Liebling of Wendell Marks Lane, and take it away, sir.
Thanks, Mayor. Very happy to be here. I started working with the borough in 2015 on Art Collar on the downtown redevelopment. You saw the timeline. I was lucky to come in where we actually were able to get to an agreement, and when I was here for the groundbreaking a couple months ago, it was a great moment, just to finally see this get over the hump, and driving by and seeing the progress is great, and congratulations to everybody. Once a redevelopment plan is in place and a redeveloper wants to do a project, it's different than regular zoning. There's no kind of agreement in place when someone wants to just do something on their property. Because it's subject to a redevelopment plan, you enter into an agreement that that keeps their feet to the fire, basically. The borough has adopted a plan. That means that they have seen a specific need to make something happen on these properties, and the agreement makes sure that that happens. So I wanted to walk through with you the way a redevelopment agreement works, and you'll see, and I kind of noticed this myself as I was making notes. It makes sense. It's what you would want to require of a developer, and also what the town wants to see, and also because it is a partnership of sorts, facilitating for the redeveloper getting the project done, because that's the end goal. Is everybody wants to see this done. So I took as an example 150 North, which you saw the picture of, and went through that redevelopment agreement, and I figured I'd just kind of dissect it for you and tell you how they work. The 150 North is an empty lot. For those of you who don't have immediately in mind, it's an empty lot on the corner of Jackson Avenue across from Station Plaza, and it's a simple project. 1,500 square feet approximately, 14 residential units, 12 are market rate, 2 are affordable, as well as the ground floor commercial, which I mentioned. So first thing in a redevelopment agreement is, what is the project? And it describes that. This is what you're going to build. This is what we've agreed to. You've come in, you've shown us the picture. Okay, this is what you're going to build now. And you're going to get all the financing, and you're going to make all the improvements on the site and off-site necessary to do it, and you're going to make an effort to then market the space and find tenants so that we've got an active thing here. Not a small portion is you're also going to pay the borough's costs, the costs that the borough incurs in hiring its professionals to make all this happen, and that's the beginning of redevelopment. What's next? The schedule. You can't sit on this forever. You have to stick to a schedule that we've agreed to make this project happen. And there's a schedule. It's attached, and it says, here's when you're going to come in with a proposal. Here's when you're going to go to the planning board. Here's when you get all your approvals by. Here's when you're going to get in the ground. Here's when you're going to finish. And they need to stick to that. And the borough has enforcement remedies if it doesn't. But there's understanding in there too. There's a recognition that things can happen. A concept called force majeure, which is, there's a pandemic. Everyone looked at their agreements to see if pandemic was in there when that befell us. Floods, strikes, things that can slow something down. So there's give and take there. And then if something like that happens, the redeveloper comes back to the town and say, hey, I'm having some trouble. Let's work out some changes here, and the agreement provides for that. Then when the project's done, they get a certificate of completion from the borough that says you've done everything you need to do. You're off the hook for this agreement now. It's a piece of private property. Project oversight. The borough reserves the right to oversee the project. So progress meetings, progress reports, all of which are mandated. Borough representatives can go onto the property, see what's going on, and make sure that the progress that's committed to is being made. There's a separate provision about infrastructure. Projects, especially in an older downtown, often need additional infrastructure to make them work. So that may mean sewer improvements, new road improvements, other types of utility, bringing cable, bringing additional water, whatever it might be. Those are all set forth and required of the redeveloper that they do that. There's a provision about approvals. Some projects are a simple approval. It's a trip to the planning board. Others, like Art Color, have a zillion approvals, and they need to list what all those are and keep the borough apprised of how those are being obtained. There is a commitment about financing, that the redeveloper is capable of obtaining financing, that they're going to do everything they need to do to get the financing for the project and pay all those costs, including the borough ones that we spoke about. There are protections in place for the lender because there's a recognition that a developer is going to go get a bank loan, and a lender needs to be confident that if things go wrong, they will be able to recoup their loan. So the borough acknowledges that if there's a default and a foreclosure, the bank has the opportunity to come in to find another developer to take their place, and that the borough will hold off on exercising its remedies while the bank is doing that. Otherwise, you can't get a loan and the project doesn't proceed. So that's standard and works well. And fortunately, it's needed rarely. Because part of the process also between the plan and this is making sure that the redeveloper is capable of carrying out the project. The redeveloper has a bunch of what are called covenants that they agree to as well. That they're going to remediate the property if needed. That they're not going to stop work. They're not going to discontinue their performance. They can't sell the property while it's being done. They can't bring in someone else. We've picked you. We've signed an agreement with you. You can't just now go out and give it to someone else. We trust you. You'll let us know if there's any change in your financial condition. You'll properly supervise. You'll limit your impact on the neighborhood. You'll control the impact on traffic. You'll watch out for pests and animal infestation, light, noise. You'll keep the site maintained, and all these are requirements that are imposed on the redeveloper. The other piece that's my legal colleague Sandy Galicia will get to, that was relevant to this one was the affordable housing piece. And Dunellen does have an affordable housing obligation, and that is being passed through to developers to include affordable housing in their projects so that Dunellen can meet its obligations under its settlement agreement. Developers are required to carry all kinds of insurance. They required to indemnify the borough for any claims that might be brought against the borough that arise out of the project. So somebody falls, the person who falls says, okay, I'm going to sue the guy whose project this is, and also the borough, because they have a redevelopment agreement. That's now the burden of the developers. It's not a borough responsibility. Defaults can and do happen, and you saw that there had some, early in the Art Color process, agreements weren't reached. That could be for just not building the project. That could be for violating the schedule. That could be for trying to sell the property to somebody else. Bankruptcy, other misrepresentations. And the borough has its remedies. They can terminate the agreement, which is what usually happens. They can go to court and require the redeveloper to perform if it's something they haven't done. And there's also the opportunity to seek damages if the borough has suffered damages resulting from the default of the redeveloper. So that's basically the guts of a redevelopment agreement. This redevelopment agreement also has a First Amendment associated with it, which is going before the council, I believe, next month. And that's related to community benefits, which is another concept. In addition to the redevelopment project itself, which is intended to have broad overall benefits by bringing blighted property back into productive use, there's also just the concept of something specific that the redeveloper does for the community. And for this project, there is a monetary contribution being made towards the cost of pedestrian crossings, most particularly because of the location of this development and the shopping center. That's something that they have agreed to. So that's an amendment to this agreement that will be considered by council next month. Any questions?
Well, if we're okay, can we wait for the question?
Absolutely, okay.
So everybody hold their questions till the end. We'll leave about 15, 20 minutes to ask questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
so-
Thanks.
Next up, we have Mr. Sandy Galatio of Wendell Marks Lane as well, to speak about affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Sandy Galatio from Wendell's Marks Lane in Wittendorf. I'm also happy to be here tonight. I've been working with Chuck for several years on the Dunellen redevelopment projects, and we're really enjoying this work for you. As Chuck touched on in the redevelopment agreement, it has a section that sets forth the redeveloper's obligations with respect to creating affordable housing as part of their project. As I'll talk about in a little bit, the redevelopment plan has required set-asides for affordable housing, depending on whether it's a for sale or a rental residential project. And those obligations are channeled to each developer through the redevelopment agreement to identify the specific number of units that this project is suspected to produce. The obligations based on the number of units that are being built overall by the developer, and there's a certain percentage of those units that have to be affordable. The redevelopment agreement also includes an obligation for the redeveloper to comply with all the applicable affordable housing regulations, including the uniform housing affordability controls, which are state regulations. They address how much rents can be charged for affordable units, how many bedrooms have to be created, and things like that. Right, go backwards.
There you go.
There we go.
Right, to the left.
It's the left one there forward. Okay.
There you go.
It's upside down now, it's the right one.
We'll get there.
The agreement also sets forth for the redeveloper the duration of the affordability controls. So under the state regulations, the units are required to be affordable for at least 30 years. And that obligation is set forth in a deed restriction that's filed against those particular units, so that if, when the units change hands, a new tenant comes in that's an affordable tenant, it can only be rented to an affordable tenant. It can't be rented to a market rate tenant during that 30-year period. If it's a for sale unit, that's the same, has the same restriction. You can only sell it to someone who's qualified for the affordability controls, not to someone who can afford a regular market rate house. The agreement sets forth that there will be an administrative agent that enforces the affordability regulations. That can be either The borough can do that itself. The borough can hire a third party who specializes in that to administer the units, or they can appoint the redeveloper themselves to do it. There are certain state controls that govern the approval of who's going to be the administrative unit or the administrative agent. And those are all set forth in the redevelopment agreement. There we go. So the borough has a constitutional obligation under the Mountain Laurel cases to zone for affordable housing within the borough. That doesn't mean the borough has to create the units themselves. They just have to, through their zoning ordinances, allow for the construction of a required number of units within the borough. The borough received approval in 2016 from the New Jersey Superior Court for its current affordable housing plan, which establishes that zoning, certain code provisions related to provision of affordable housing that the court agreed will yield, or has the potential to yield, the required number of units that Dunellen has. That obligation for the borough was determined to be 118 affordable units. Now, 58 of those units are being created at the Dunellen Station project, as the mayor initially indicated. That's currently under construction. All of those affordable units will be rental units in the apartment part of the project. There's also another project that was approved and I believe completed at 364 to 368 North Avenue that yielded 2 affordable units. Therefore, the borough's unmet need is 53 affordable units, and I know the math doesn't work out correctly because there are certain bonuses that the borough was entitled to based on the units provided. So the determined unmet need in the Superior Court case is 53 affordable units. So what the borough decided to do in its zoning was allow for those units to be created within the redevelopment area, the downtown redevelopment area. So the obligation to create those units on redevelopers is set forth in the redevelopment plan. Right. So the redevelopment plan requires a minimum of 15% of any new rental residential units created within the redevelopment area must be affordable units. That bumps up to a minimum of 20% set aside for sale residential units. 20% of those must be affordable units. There are current projects underway within the area number 4. As we already mentioned, 150 North Avenue. There are 2 affordable units that are expected to be produced in that project. 528 North Avenue with 6 affordable units. 740 Boundbrook Road with 3 affordable units. And 440 North Avenue with 1 affordable unit. As I indicated, affordable units are deed restricted for a minimum of 30 years. At the expiration of that 30-year period, the borough can elect to have that restriction continue, or it can release those units from the restriction. However, if it releases those units, it would have to find other units somewhere else within the borough to meet that obligation. So the expectation is municipalities will keep those restrictions in place. Now, what does affordable mean? Each year, the affordable housing professionals in New Jersey prepare a chart that lists the income limits for the different regions of New Jersey. They identify what the median, the moderate, low, and very low income will be for each region. Now, Dunellen is in what's called region number 3. That consists of Middlesex, Somerset, and Hunterdon counties. I put up an example on the screen for moderate income households. That means an annual income of more than $55,440, but less than $88,704. And so that is the maximum income that you can have to qualify for affordable housing is $88,704. That's for a 3-person household. Low-income households is $55,440 or less, and very low income is $33,264 or less. Now, the chart is prepared for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person households. So the median income varies depending on how big the household is. Under the regulations and the settlement agreement that the borough entered into with Fair Share Housing Center in connection with the affordable housing litigation, 13% of units have to be affordable to very low income household units. And at least 50% of the units have to be affordable to low or very low income households. And that's percentages of the affordable units themselves, not of the overall project's market rate units. Now, each municipality is required to have a municipal affordable housing program. Mr. Robbins, the borough clerk, and the borough administrator is designated as the municipal housing liaison. He is the liaison between the developers and the township and other entities that are involved in the creation of affordable housing. He would work with the administrative agent in administering the units. The administrative agent is either appointed by the borough through a contract, or it could be the developer itself, or it could be the borough itself. The administrative agent will take in applications from prospective tenants or purchasers of affordable units. They will do the income qualification to determine whether the person is eligible to have affordable housing. They will monitor the units to make sure that affordable persons are still occupying the unit. They will take care of the retirement of affordable units if the affordability controls expire. They will handle that and removal of the restrictions. The cost of the administrative agent under the borough ordinance and the contemplation of the state regulations is to be paid for by the developer or the owner of the property. Okay, so that's not a borough. It should not be a borough cost. Any person interested, the borough is also developing an affordable housing marketing program that'll be done in conjunction with each redeveloper. That involves advertising, publishing in the newspaper that, hey, there are 10 available units in Dunellen. We'd like to have people apply for them so that it gets the word out there. It also reaches out to certain community groups to let them know that there are affordable units available. Any person interested in renting affordable housing in the borough can submit an application or an inquiry to Mr. Robbins through the borough's website. And I placed the link where that information is available on the slide.
Okay.
Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you, Mayor.
Up next, we have Daniel Marinello of NW Financial. He's our financial advisors, and he'll be discussing about municipality and the impact of schools and how it pertains to new development pilots. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Myself, my firm has been working with Dunellen since the Art Color site got started, and been glad to be here and really see the progress that's going on in the community. When developers come into communities like Dunellen, they are typically the big developers come in, and they're armed with professionals on their side that have run through specific pro formas and models that they go through to create what they believe is the most optimum financial project for themselves. And because of that, it's important for communities like Dunellen and others to have firms like ours, and what we do and what we provide is the same type of financial expertise, but on the borough side. And it's important because, of course, the developers are looking to try and get as good an edge as they can financially. And we're looking to try and make sure that they do well, but that the borough is protected at the same time. I always look at it almost like a marriage. We enter into long-term financial agreements and redevelopment agreements with developers. We're in it together. So we do want the developers to make money, of course. The more that they succeed, the more investment and the better the project is. But we also want the borough to succeed as well financially. And we'll get into a little bit about pilots and how we negotiate pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes, in a minute. But one of the things that we try to create is to balance the revenue coming in from developers on their site specifics with the costs that the municipalities are going to incur. And the costs really are the municipal costs of having to service now X number of new residents, and the costs to the schools on the potential new public school children that are coming into the system. And it's actually probably the most heated conversations we have as we go through this all the time. What's the impact on schools? Even in the New Jersey studies that have been done by the Rutgers Blaustein School and Professor Listokin, it says right in there, it's one of the biggest misconceptions, especially with transit-oriented developments. There's always a big discussion about how all these new units are going to come in, and we're going to flood our schools, and the costs are going to go way up, and our taxes are going to go way up. And in truth, that is actually not what happens, especially with transit-oriented developments. And I think you'll see, as more of these transit-oriented developments are being built, a lot of that is the size of the units are very small. So you're seeing, one bedrooms at 650 square feet, two bedrooms at, 800, 900 square feet. We're not talking about, building single-family homes where people are going to bring in large families and large students. So with that being said, a little small if anyone can read it. So what we try to do is, we've created a database ourselves at our firm with a lot of the developments that have occurred in North Jersey, and to see how many school children come out of each of the developments. And the purpose of that is to apply multipliers to the number of units that are coming in, both school children and residents. But the best way to go about doing that, which really has the backing of the professionals at the state level, is using the studies that have been done through Rutgers. There was a study that was done, I think it was 2006, was the first major one that was done, that really looked at multipliers and how many school students are coming out of these developments. That was actually just updated in 2018, and it changed a lot of it. They actually brought down the multipliers because they were too high after doing all of the research over the last 12 years, that there actually weren't as many school students coming out of these transit-oriented developments. Actually all of the developments, but mostly the transit-oriented developments. And so they went back and they redid the whole study and came up with new multipliers. And that's both for new residents and for school children. And then what we do is we look at the new developments that are coming here, we apply the multipliers to those, and then we apply a cost to both new residents and to new school students. And of course, at the end, as we negotiate with developers on what we're going to require of them and ask of them for pilot payments, we obviously need to not only make sure we're covering our costs, which we're going to show you how we get to that point, but also adding additional funding to the municipality, whether it's for new projects, offset budget costs, and things like that. So you have to create the multipliers, apply them to the number of units, and then come up with a cost for each of the new school students or from the municipal budget. So this is I just came, did not use a specific project here in Dunellen, so that's, don't hold me to numbers as you apply these to a project, but these are the multipliers that are currently being used in the Rutgers studies that have come out of the state. So the persons, yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Right arrow. So as you can see, for persons, for new residents, for studios and 1 bedrooms, 1.551 per unit, 2 bedrooms, 2.355, 3 bedrooms, 3.289. And applying that to a 50-unit building in town, you would get approximately 95 new residents in town. You do the same thing with the multipliers for the school children. Studios and 1 bedrooms, 0.004, 2 bedrooms, 0.065, and 3 bedrooms, 0.245. That's the number of school children per unit. So in this 50-unit building, we're really only talking about 2 new school students. And for that has played out accurately among the projects that have been built in North Jersey. I'll go through a couple actual examples of that. And this is, as you can see for the bottom, these are for market rate units. So that the original 2006 study that Rutgers did have these multipliers for school students for affordable projects. And I will give you those numbers as well. The new study actually took the affordable multipliers out because it varied more than they had enough information to really keep them in the study. But I'll just go through it here because I wrote them down in the old study. And we had actually gone through this exercise for the Art Polar project when that first came on board. So the affordable projects for 1 bedrooms, for example, the multiplier is 0.14. If 2 bedrooms, it's 0.62, and 3 bedrooms, it's 1.27. That's the new school students. Again, that was taken out of the new study, but that's what was in the original study. This, again, is based on a market building. So let's talk about municipal costs for a second. There's a model that the state has created down at the Division of Local Government Services that is used by a lot of people to evaluate the net cost to the municipality. It's called the PFAF, the Pilot Financial Agreement Forecast. And what it does is it goes through certain parts of your municipal budget that can be affected by new residents coming on board. And because it's not your entire budget doesn't change just by having a new, X number of people coming in from a residential project. So what are they? Public Works, certain health and human services, landfill, solid waste disposal, public safety, obviously police, courts, public defenders. So they have gone through that New Jersey municipal budget, and they apply percentages of those department costs to new residents. So for example, here, that actually was calculated at $165 for a new resident. The impact on your budget is $165 per person. So in this particular example, the 95 new people at $165 would cost $15,675 in their budget. Of course, this is not exact science work here, so you try to use this as a guide as you are negotiating with developers and what you expect to receive from them from a revenue standpoint. And of course, we really have to make sure we're covering this cost at the minimum. We obviously want it to be much more. But for a 50 unit new building, $15,675 of new residential costs to the municipal budget. The school costs is a little different. It's another one of those items that becomes probably the biggest conversation you have when you're talking with communities. and what are the impacts on schools. This analysis that I'm going to walk you through for the new school students assumes that we don't have to build a new school. This is where we have the infrastructure to be able to take on the new students that are coming on board. The Dunellen 2021-2022 budget for the Board of Ed lists the classroom instruction cost for a student at $8,381. And that is the cost of classroom instruction. It's not, when you look at the budget and you divide it by the number of students, that's not $8,381. That's more, but you're talking about capital costs, debt service, and other items that are not affected by a student within the classroom. So you have to take out, and that designation is not one that we do as an analysis. That designation comes from the state. It's part of the budget that shows you what the cost of classroom instruction for a student in Dunellen is. The actual revenues from, okay, so where I go from the 8,381, then what we do is we look at how much of your school budget is funded from local revenues. Your entire budget is not funded through taxes. You have a portion of your budget funded by local taxes and a portion of your school budget funded from other revenue sources, including the state. In this particular case, Dunellen's budget, 61% of it comes from local taxes. So what we do is we take the cost of the classroom instruction, we multiply it by how much of that is borne by the taxpayers in Renewal, and we get 5,166. That's the cost to the taxpayer for a new student in the borough of Dunellen. And so what we'll do, right, is we'll apply that $5,166 to each new school student that is projected to come out of the development, and we get $10,332 in this particular example. That's building the report and the model that we will eventually, as financial advisors, come to this team here and base our recommendations on what we believe is what the developer can afford to pay us, so that they're still making their returns, but they're covering our costs and actually getting a lot more for the borough. But it's important to know what the base cost is, and it becomes an issue, a contended issue all the time. And the other thing about schools, as you will understand, is their budgets are always fully funded, at 100%. So they're never, schools like to think that they like to say that they're losing money, but they're never really losing money. There may be additional costs for the new students, but as you can see, we're making sure we're covering that with the new development. So obviously, in the next slide, did you change that? The combination is for this 50-unit building, the new costs are $26,000 on the taxpayers of Dunellen. We're going to go through with Matthew the pilots and agreements and how we get there, payments in lieu of taxes and percentages of gross revenue. But just to complete the conversation, we look at the unit mix, we look at the rents that they can afford in Dunellen, what are the rents that they'll be getting, and an annual rent. So in this particular case, in this example, a 50-unit building might produce a little over $1 million in revenue. Then what we end up negotiating with the developer is a percentage of that revenue as a pilot. Whereas typically you would have regular taxes, right, on any typical residential building or residential house. In this particular case, in order for developers to be successful financially, they cannot build a building and pay conventional taxes. When I say they can't, that's part of the test that we all have to come up with. If the law actually has what they refer to as a but-for test. If if the developer was to pay regular taxes based on the project that they are creating, and it is not a financially successful, they can't do it, they wouldn't do it, then that's when you can start to negotiate a pilot, some other way of bringing in revenue. So they're still paying, it's not a tax, it's called a pilot. And so what we do in this particular case, for example, this 50-unit building would produce at 10% of gross revenues, they would pay a pilot of $97,000. In some cases, we net out land taxes as a part of that, so the county would get their share, the school would get the share, and the town would get a share. There's an administration fee. So out of the $97,000 in this particular case, the borough share would be $83,000. And obviously the $83,000, that was the first year. We had the cost of $26,000 based on the residents and the schools. So the net benefit of the town would be $57,000 in year one. And we run that out for the 30 years. So the net benefit after costs for a 50-unit building is $2.7 million over 30 years. And again, there's a lot in there, and I know we're going through it relatively quickly, and this is a big issue, but the idea of this whole exercise is to build a report and a memo that we can provide to the administration. It will help them guide whether or not this is a pilot that makes sense to provide for the developers, or it's not enough, we need to add more. In many cases, the developers want to start at the lowest that they can, 10%, and then we start to build on top of that, and then you end up eventually getting to a point where there's a balance between what the developers' returns are. As I stated in the beginning, you want them to make money. They're investing big dollars into these projects, but you also want to make sure there's a benefit to the municipality. And this is how we build that exercise out. So there's a lot in gross revenues and pilots that Matt's going to talk about, so we'll kind of get back to that, but that's the school and municipal impact costs.
Okay,
So
thank you, Dan.
very much.
Next up, we have Matthew Jessup, Esquire, from the Hammond Scott Endowment, LLC, and he's going to discuss annual service charges, or commonly known as pilots, and redevelopment bonds, which are known as REDs.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Before I begin, two things. One, I want to thank Dan for interrupting what would have been 3 lawyers talking for about 45 minutes in a row, which sounds more like medieval torture than a good way to spend your Wednesday evening. And two, doing seminars like this for a really long time, I long ago learned that when you go last, finish early to get everybody out. So I will try to get through this as quickly as possible. Dan actually touched on a couple things early in these slides. I'll go through them real quick. You see the term annual service charge. We also talk about pilot. We actually more often, I think, use the word pilot, which stands for payment in lieu of tax. Instead of the developer paying a conventional tax bill like we all pay on our homes, they make a statutory payment in lieu of that tax. The reason you also see annual service charge is because I hope you never have to read the statute, but if you do read the law, it's actually referred to in the law as an annual service charge and not a pilot. Again, replaces the conventional tax on the improvements in every circumstance, and in certain circumstances on the land as well. So if you look at your own tax bill, you see a land assessed value and an improvement assessed value, and you have a tax on each that's combined, and that's the bill you get. With a redevelopment project, in certain circumstances, they'll still pay the land tax, but they'll pay a pilot on the improvement. And in other circumstances, they'll pay the pilot on both the land and the improvement. And pilots are used up and down the state throughout New Jersey. Some often think of a pilot as a tool used in urban environments, in communities that have lower incomes than other municipalities. I think this whole team has done pilot projects in every type of community, urban, suburban, rural, from what you consider the AAA rated economic municipalities in New Jersey and down. These are really used statewide. Dan mentioned the but-for test. Here it is. Pilots are a great tool, but we can't just use them whenever we want. We do have to first prove statutorily that but for the pilot, the redevelopment project would not be built. So as you'll see in a minute, Dan's firm will come in and basically look at the project, look at what it would pay in conventional taxes, and say either it can or it can't afford the conventional taxes. If it can't afford to pay those conventional taxes as it's built, then we can go ahead and look on a pilot as an option. So who can pay the annual service charge? An entity called an urban renewal entity. This is really a creation by the developer. They have to file themselves as an urban renewal entity with the state. What it really means is that they are limited profit entity. So again, as Dan talked about earlier, we want our developer to make a good return, but we don't want them retiring off a single project. And the long-term tax exemption law sort of takes care of this by limiting the amount of profit that this urban renewal entity can make. And anybody can really pay a pilot. So if you are the developer of an apartment complex, you own that development, you're paying the tax bill, so in this case you're paying the pilot bill. You're of course getting that revenue from rents, but the actual tenants renting the building aren't, they're paying rent, they're not paying the pilot directly. But if you have a pilot on a for sale project, a condo project, then one of us as an individual purchaser does not have to be an urban renewal entity, right? We can then pay the pilot ourselves in lieu of our tax bill. Again, the amount of the profit is restricted by law, and under the statute, any excess profits, are actually paid by the developer over to the municipality. Raise your hands if you've ever seen that in this group. I mean, it never happens, right? The developer always stays within their excess profit limitations, and if they're dangerously close, I suspect they fire their accountant and they figure out how to make it work otherwise. I think importantly, the urban renewal entity cannot file a tax appeal on their project while they're paying the annual service charge. So, and that's largely because, as Dan showed earlier with those percentages, their pilot number is already going to ebb and flow with the success of the project. So if the project is not as successful, arguably the project is not worth as much, but they're also already paying less because they're typically paying a percentage of their income. But I think it's important that when you partner with a developer, you work really hard, as Chuck mentioned earlier, through a redevelopment agreement. As Dan mentioned, you're sort of 30-year partners. You don't have somebody who then turns around a year later and sues the town and says, I want my assessment lower, right? It doesn't really feel like we're in the spirit of being partners anymore. So I do think that's important. The urban renewal entity can opt out of paying a pilot after a year in most circumstances and go back to paying conventional taxes. Of course, go back a couple minutes, if they couldn't afford to do that in the first place, why would they do that now? If there are redevelopment bonds issued to fund a portion of the project-related infrastructure, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, then they can, because those pilots essentially, or a portion of those pilots, are earmarked to pay debt service on bonds. So we can't just lose that debt service, a year or 2 years, however many years in. The process to get the pilot, the developer has to submit a written application. There are a host of content requirements, importantly, including a fiscal plan that Dan and his team can evaluate, architectural and site plans so that the planning team and the engineering team at the borough can evaluate. We can all understand exactly what's being built, how it's being paid for, what the cash flows and the project financials look for. From there, the mayor actually is the one charged at first with reviewing the application and then making a recommendation to the governing body. The governing body can then, by resolution of the law, approve the application, but then the financial agreement, which is a document that memorializes the terms of the pilot, has to be approved by ordinance. So So we often just do those things at one time by ordinance. The financial agreement, again, is the document, similar to the redevelopment agreement Chuck referenced earlier. Financial agreement is between the borough and the developer, and it memorializes all the terms of the annual service charge. So how much is the developer paying in a pilot? Establishing and confirming that there are limitations on their profits. Again, confirming that we're exempting the improvements from conventional tax, that we're also exempting the land from conventional tax if appropriate. And as Dan mentioned in his pro forma, the municipality typically charges an administrative fee, right? So we want to document that and contractually require the administrative fee. We want to determine the term of the financial agreement and other key components. And this is the most key component, right? What is the pilot amount going to be? How is it computed? Typically, pilots are either a percentage of their annual gross revenue, so total revenue from the project, rents, parking fees, storage fees, pet fees. If anybody's rented in an apartment complex, you know that the owner can tack on a whole host of fees. All of those fees are income to the developer. We care about the gross income when it comes to setting a pilot amount. So the fact that their expenses may be higher because they're not as good at managing a project as others doesn't adversely impact the amount that the municipality is going to get paid. If it is a percentage of annual gross revenue, then the minimum number is 10% in, again, most conventional circumstances. And I think in Dan's scenario, we saw it started at 10% of the annual service charge. That number can go up. It can be 11, it can be 12, it can be 13, and that's really where Dan comes in and says the right number is 10 for 10 years, 11 for 10 years, and 12 for the last 10 years, or some component of that. Pilots can also be a percentage of the total project cost. So we just look to what it costs to build initially. We don't look to how much revenue the project is making down the road. There, the minimum would be 2% of project costs. We really generally see those more in hotel projects and maybe grocery projects, but not on the typical apartment complex, townhome complex, or mixed-use residential over a bottom floor retail component. Of every pilot dollar that gets paid by a developer, the municipality keeps 95 cents of that dollar, and the other 5 cents goes to the county. So unlike a traditional tax dollar, like the ones we all pay, where the borough probably collects, I don't know, 20 cents per tax dollar or so?
6%.
26%? Okay, so about a quarter of the tax dollar goes to the borough. An amount goes to the county, an amount goes to the Board of Ed, the school, maybe a fire district, a library, on and on. This is a lot simpler, and as you can tell, weighted a lot more for the benefit of the municipality. 95 cents to the municipality, 5 cents to the county. We can do a pilot for basically 30 years. The term of the financial agreement can be longer, but the amount of time that the developer is going to pay that pilot is going to be for a period of 30 years. Can be less, but again, typical projects we see are about 30 years. So this is sort of an example of how we'd evaluate the but-for test and arrive at a conclusion of what we should charge a pilot in what is a residential project. So sort of dangerous when lawyers do math, dangerous when I try to take Dan's job here, but so Dan can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially what this shows is if this project that cost about $56.5 million to construct, if it were conventionally taxed, it would have a market value upon completion of $45 million. So is a developer going to spend $56 million to build something that on day one, when it's newest and at its best, is only worth $45 million? No, right? There's an $11 million shortfall. Not only will they not do it, a bank won't give them the money to build it in the first place. So now we know that if we do pay conventional taxes, the project's never going to get built. So what do we end up doing? We end up looking at what the tax bill could be that provides the developer with the return that they're looking for and gets the value upon completion of the project to be equal to the cost of construction. And ironically, in this case, we still couldn't get it to 10% of the annual service charge. It was more like 7.7% of the annual service charge. And the developer nonetheless agreed basically to make a slightly lesser than what Dan would probably call a standard return and pay the 10% annual service charge. But if you run through this math and determine that that number is rightly 11% of annual service charge, that's how we sort of get to that conclusion that the developer should pay 11% of the annual gross revenue as an annual service charge. So compare the two scenarios. In a conventional tax scenario on that same project, again, really it never gets built. But the hypothetical, if it were to get built and it were to pay conventional taxes, it would pay about $973,000. The municipality in this hypothetical gets 17%, so they collect $171,000. But in a pilot at 10%, the developer now pays half of what he or she would have paid. And that's critical because that's how they can afford to build the project. If we don't cut that down, this project never gets built. But because the municipality gets 95%, the municipality is now getting over $400,000 in total tax revenue. So a significant increase in revenue to the municipality, as Dan pointed out earlier, without adversely impacting the borough's budget, without adversely impacting the school district, which are both important, and while ensuring that the project actually gets built in the first place. Again, here, I think I just sort of went through the reasons why we need the pilot, right? The project gets done, the municipality gets more money, and not only do we make sure the school district is allocated, but there is an ability through shared services to additionally cover school costs if that's necessary. All while, as everyone else has mentioned, the project height, density, affordable housing, all of the requirements of the municipality are being met through the redevelopment process instead of through the straight zoning process where you might not have quite as much control. Okay, I don't know what I did. So we'll go here. Okay, so we have a project, we have a pilot, which means we have a revenue stream. There are certain circumstances where we also may want to, the borough may want to issue bonds, long-term financial instruments, to fund a portion of either the redevelopment project itself, associated off-site infrastructure in connection with the project. There may be additional water and sewer infrastructure upgrades that are necessary in order to support the new project. There may be environmental remediation at the site that simply causes that project to be more expensive than a traditional project that had clean soil would be. And so we have a couple of different options as to how the municipality can get involved and issue long-term debt to help fund those extra project costs that might not be come along with a traditional project. So there's a couple choices. You can issue general obligation bonds pursuant to the local bond law. That's the same mechanism Dunellen uses to issue bonds to fund road improvements and park improvements and upgrade playgrounds and things like that, that Scott Olson is certainly familiar with. There's an ability to issue revenue-backed bonds that are secured by various revenues that are produced by the project. We don't see that very often. And then redevelopment area bonds, which we see certainly quite often, bonds that are secured by those pilot payments or a portion of those pilot payments that the developer is paying to the municipality. One of the benefits of issuing bonds under one of these methods is instead of that 10% of annual service charge or 2% of total project cost pilot, we can negotiate and set the pilot amount to a number that we and the developer collectively want. So there's a little more flexibility to get to a pilot number that works for everybody. General obligation bonds, there are some benefits to issuing those. They are secured by the ad valorem taxing power of the municipality, which is, potentially a risk the municipality takes. If the project fails if the revenues aren't sufficient, it's the municipal budget that picks up the debt service. So we don't see these very often. But they are cheaper to issue, and if the scenario is one where the pilot number is set, the bonds have to be paid, and the borough keeps the difference, well then the borough has an incentive to get that bond debt service as low as possible, because then they keep more pilot dollars. But I think really the biggest con to this general obligation bonds is that payment risk. Essentially, the borough is guaranteeing the debt service on those bonds. Revenue-backed bonds, not necessarily secured by the municipality, secured typically by revenues of the project, such as loan repayments. We don't see these very often. Interest rate tends to be very high. The only revenues you really tend to see are securitized are pilots, and that's the scenario here. So with a revenue redevelopment area bond or a RAB bond, the bonds are typically secured solely by the pilot or a special assessment, which we didn't talk about tonight, but typically a pilot. They are not typically also secured by the municipality. So the bondholder, if there's a failure to make a pilot payment, the bondholder's sole recourse is to look to the project and try and enforce any remedies they have against the project. They can't come to the borough, they can't come to the CFO, the mayor, the borough council, and ask them to step in financially and help. There's no obligation there. As a result, there is a little bit of a higher risk to that bondholder, so the interest rate does tend to be a little bit higher. The world of bondholders who are willing to buy a bond like that are not quite as broad as ones that would buy a general obligation bond of the municipality. And as a result, those bonds are typically bought by the developer, an affiliate of the developer, or the developer's construction lender, who already is making a loan, probably 70% of the project cost, to fund, so they'll make the additional loan and have it secured by these bonds. The key to the security for these bonds is, in any circumstance where there's a pilot, a failure by the developer to pay the pilot is akin to a failure of any of us to pay our real estate taxes. That creates a lien, that's an enforceable lien. It trumps almost all other liens existing on the property, including our mortgages, right? So the municipality has the ability ultimately to sell our property, and they get paid before our mortgage lender gets paid. That security exists on these pilot bonds as well. And so that makes a mortgage lender to the project nervous, because if there are bonds out there and they're not bought by the construction lender, and there's a failure to make that pilot payment, they might lose the collateral on their loan. And we have seen projects paid for by RABs that sat vacant for 4, 5, 6 years, and the construction bank, the construction lender, the mortgage lender made every single pilot payment every single quarter, because there's no way they're going to let the lien of the bonds trump their mortgage and replace their security. And that's really the beauty of this instrument relative to the redevelopment law. And the last thing I'll say, typically we see these bonds issued when we have a project cost of $50 million, the developer can get $45 million, but they just can't get the last $5 million. So in order to complete that capital stack and get the project off the ground, RABs are a great way to come in and fund that last $5 million piece. So now we have all $50 million. We have a mortgage loan, we have equity from the developer, and we have the RAB to make the deal work and get our project built.
Okay, thank you, Matt. This time we'll open up the floor to the public, those who are present, those who are on by dial-in, who ask any questions to any of our speakers on the panel. So, any questions from the public?
I'm a Rob. Thanks. Chuck, the borough has a RAB on the Dunellen stations.
Correct.
It has not been acted on yet. But then I'm going to expand it because our team is up there. Dan, when we got the number for the pilot number, we took that into consideration, the future, that whenever it kicks in and we actually sell them, So we have, I don't know the number, whether ours is a 10 or 11, but a percentage of that is accounted for.
Correct, so when we negotiated that art color site, we ended with a pilot amount. I'm going to, it's pretty close, but I'll say when at stabilization, approximately $1.5 million a year in pilot payments from the developer, of which I think we maxed out at 700,000 of the $1.5 million was going to be used to pay off the RAB bond, and the remaining 800,000 a year, increasing, by the way, as rents increase, would come solely to the borough. And then, in fact, as I had mentioned before, with school costs and municipal costs, we actually, in that particular contract agreement, we put a minimum pilot that covered amounts for the school students that we estimated coming in and the municipal costs that were coming in. So the net number to the borough far exceeds the costs, but it would never go below, no matter what the rents do. The pilot would never go below what it costs the borough in municipal costs and school costs. And that was something that we had made sure was in that agreement. But yes, to your point, the pilot in that one covers the debt service on the RAB bonds plus the net to the town.
Excellent, thank you. I have an additional question that's for Sandy. Sandy, on the affordable housing, I think I heard you say that for owner residential units, houses, is there an obligation of 20% of new houses to be affordable housing, or did I misunderstand?
Yeah, it's only new residential units in the redevelopment area. If they're for sale units, then 20% of the for sale units have to be affordable.
Okay, under Dunellen stations, it doesn't appear to be there. So I'll come back and ask, why was it that, or how did that happen, that the for sale units did not have affordable housing?
That was part of the settlement of the declaratory judgment action that approved Dunellen's affordable housing plan. So that site was identified then, during that lawsuit, as one that was going to yield units. And part of the settlement with Fair Share Housing was that those 58 units generated would be all rental units and not any of the for sale units.
Thank you for reminding me. I was actually in the courtroom when John Bruder presented all of this, and your elucidation made me remember that this was what happened. Thank you.
Sure. So if there's a new project that has 10 for sale units within the redevelopment area, 2 of those would have to be affordable.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Mr. Locke?
Yeah, was there a redevelopment plan that was approved, or a redevelopment plan with that property on Boundbrook Road, North Avenue, where they had the fire? Because now I see there's a for lease. I thought that project was ready to go, was approved and everything like that, and now I see for lease.
There is a redevelopment agreement and financial agreement for 528 North Avenue. It's the Katz property. I'll let Mr. Liebling speak to that more directly.
Yeah, the most current development with that, the redeveloper has not performed as required. And the most recent development is a request to convey the property to a new redeveloper. The owner of the property is a physician, not a developer, which shows, don't try this at home. It's not that easy. And hopefully this, the borough is reviewing the proposal to identify this new developer as someone who actually could perform, and then hopefully we see progress on that site.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, a couple. In terms of the homes that are for sale, because I'm talking about the rental properties, that does not become part of the borough's ratables? In other words, I buy a townhome, okay, and do I not pay taxes on that real estate?
If it's a redevelopment project that has a pilot,
Correct.
then you would not pay taxes, you would pay the annual
The
service.
assessment fee for the...
That's set forth in the pilot, yeah.
Okay, and then okay, so basically, as a new homeowner in that particular project, I'm not paying real estate taxes, I'm paying, the developer's handling, in a sense, the taxes, or should I say,
Well, if it's a for sale context, right?
For
The
sale.
developer built it, but then he or she sells it to you.
right,
You are going to get that pilot bill in the mail, and you are going to be paying that pilot bill, just like you would have paid a conventional tax bill. So you're going to pay that. In a rental project, the developer is paying the pilot in lieu of the taxes, and the tenants are simply paying their rent. But in a for sale where you own it, you're going to be paying that tax bill every quarter. And the pilots are due just like taxes, February 1, May 1, 4 quarters through, 10-day grace period, etc.
Is that still tax deductible?
I'm sorry?
Is that still tax deductible for the homeowner?
Up to the limit.
Well, yeah, I understood,
But
yeah,
yes.
okay.
Does the homeowner have to live on site in the home that he's purchased for sale?
Well, you mean, can you then turn around and rent your project elsewhere?
yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're still going to pay that pilot. I don't see why not. Relative to what the HOA might require, because there's typically, and what your mortgage bank might require, because typically in a primary residence you can't do that.
So you do have homeowners assessment fees?
Typically, these are, yes, condos where you have a homeowners association and a homeowners assessment fee. Yeah.
One more question, in terms of the amortization of the pilot, that percentage, in terms of, I see as a percentage, maybe an increase every year, is that percentage due to inflationary concerns? Or should the town have that?
The percentage of the revenues
Yeah,
that we,
for the pilot, yeah.
when we go through the analysis and set the percentages, now the pro forma models that we use will take into account whatever inflation that you might have. Typically, we run it at a 2% increase each year, so that even though it's still 10% of gross revenues, the hope is that gross revenues continue to increase, both for the developer and for the borough, because we're getting 10% of a higher number. Right.
So again, the fees that the town would get for the pilot is based upon the profitability of the developer.
Yes, in fact, that's why it becomes a partnership. You do want the developer to succeed, so you want to put them in the best position to be able to do that, but you also need to get your share, the borough needs to get its share of that profit, as a tax. So you're in it together.
And of course, you would want you would want the developer to be successful because of the fact that now you are further burdening the borough in terms of the residents and the services that the borough has to incur as a result of this population increase.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want them to succeed. If the revenues are coming down, they're not getting the rents that they were planning on getting, then your pilot revenue would also come down, at the same level. There are minimums built into all of these agreements, so it's not as if they're ever going to pay zero.
Okay.
And in fact, in that art color site, I think the minimum was at least what we determined to be the estimated costs of school children and municipal costs coming out of that. So that particular one, it should never burden the taxpayers more than what it costs to service that building.
Okay, thank you. If we would just hold those who are in the room, I'll just go to the dial-in, because nobody, they can't see you. So anybody on the dial-in have any questions for the panel before we go back to who's sitting in the room?
Definitely, I have a question. So I saw a tabulation there of the number of students that would be additional, and it was a number of, it was a quantity of 2. So that number did not sound believable, plus that was for market rate units, and as you indicated, there were going to be, I don't know, 50 or so affordable units, and supposedly there's another other ratios used for those, as the presenter indicated. So I wanted to see what the total tabulation is. That number, that, I don't know if what we had on the screen was like an example or the real thing.
It was just
as
an,
far as
yeah,
the kids who are going to be going for school.
right, it was just an example, if I remember correctly, using the affordable ratios that I had mentioned before, which was 0.14 for the 1-bedrooms, 0.62 for 2 bedrooms, and 1.27 for 3 bedrooms. If you apply that to, what did we say the art color site has, what's that?
58.
Right, so 58 affordable units would produce somewhere around 35 school students, based on...
All right, so where's the total tabulation? So if we've got examples here, can we see the full tabulation of the new amount of kids that are coming in?
I mean, this was not, these were just examples for a general conversation about the developments and how we see them and how we recognize utilizing the revenues versus the cost to the municipality. If we have a specific site that we want to go through, we can do that. I just wasn't prepared for that tonight.
Well, so that's why we're here, to discuss the current redevelopment, not just general ideas about redevelopment, but what's actually going on. So I wanted to see the number of school kids that are coming into our district, plus that number that you gave. You said it's not the full cost, and that's true. The budget has the cost way higher than that $8,000 that you have. You didn't include any type of, extracurricular equipment, legal, admin, support services. All those kids will require that. The $8,000 is just a portion of the student cost.
Yeah, well, the costs that we use are the costs that are broken down as what it costs for a classroom instruction, which includes those services. So the total cost on a per student basis in Dunellen is over $12,000, but a lot of that is capital costs, debt service, administrative costs that are not covered or not going to be impacted by an additional student. So when the state talks about cost of classroom instruction, those are the numbers that are typically used. In fact, it's often much less than the $8,000 because there are lots of items within the classroom that are that can be shared and are shared, that they don't have to have all new certain equipment for every student that comes in. So, but that's how the state breaks it down, and we've actually seen the costs come in much lower than that, so.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to see the actual number for the money that's going to be going out versus the money that's coming in, versus a bunch of examples. So when can we get those numbers, and when will they be made public?
Well, Mayor, if I can, I think if it's for art color,
That's already made public, it's already been voted on in 2007.
right, that was presented years ago, and I'm sure it's still readily and publicly available. If it's for a future project that's coming online, it gets presented to the public as it gets presented to the council and considered for approval as a project and as a pilot. But so if it's one that's already been approved, that data is already readily available, has been for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was very difficult to hear you, but where are those numbers then? Where are they published?
On the website, underneath redevelopment, underneath the general redevelopment section. Dr. Robbins, is that correct?
I think report is on our redevelopment page, the one that's for how many school
Bill, I can't
students.
hear you.
Bill is saying that there's a report that my firm, NW Financial, had prepared back when we had voted on the art color development that states and shows this, just what we're referring to, number of school students, costs, expenses versus the revenues coming in or estimated to come in from the development. That should be on the website.
On the redevelopment website for Dunellen, you said?
Yes, Council President, on the redevelopment section of the website, we voted on it in 2017, so that information was in our packets when we voted on it. So, and as
And does
Mr.
it show, and it shows the money coming in versus all the money coming out?
Yes, that should all be there, yes.
Okay, great. And then, when did the 3 bedrooms get approved? Because when I've gone to presentations several years ago, before you were mayor, Mayor Solano, they were talking about, you know, more 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, a den, you know, not, you know, 3 bedrooms, a lot of 3 bedrooms. When did that come to be? The larger unit?
Yeah, Mr. Liebling is going to discuss it, because if you, are you referring to the Dunellen Arts Color project?
Yeah, I am actually the art color project, yeah.
I'm sorry, would you mind just stating names? I don't want to refer to you as the wrong person. I believe this was the council president was speaking.
Pardon?
Okay, so if I miscommunicate that I thought you were the council president, I apologize.
Just speaking generally, I don't have any art color unit breakdowns in front of me. But under the Uniform Affordable Housing Controls, 2 and 3 bedroom, certain percentages of 2 and 3 bedroom units are required to be included in a project, even one where the market units, where there are none of those in the market units. The state requires the project to include 3 bedroom units. So if there are 3 bedroom units, certainly some of those, I'm just sorry, I don't have the numbers, I'm just telling you what the law is, are attributable to that requirement.
Sure, what about the rest?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't know how many there are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to the next question. Yes,
So
sorry.
I have a question for Mr. Baylor. Enjoyed the presentation. The one part that I kind of struggled to see was the survey that was taken. I was hoping you could speak a little bit more on the findings of that survey.
Sure, I mean, there was multiple questions throughout the survey. Some of them, this is just example of the question, but for example, one of the questions was what height would you like to see in Dunellen? And the majority of that, I don't have the percentage in front of me, but the highest percentage for that question was 3 stories. There were some open possibilities to 4 stories, but that's an example of the question. Another question was, what would you like to see in terms of new public space in downtown Dunellen? And that one was the highest of all the responses. It was 91%, and that was the impetus for the Poplar Park to see that. But I could happily share more of the survey results with the borough, and you can put it on the website.
The survey results are on the website. Yeah. Everything is on the website. We completely re-updated the whole redevelopment section. Each project is individually listed out, description of it, image of it. So everything has been made transparent and available.
Thank you.
For the affordable housing can you apply pre-construction on the website? They're not fully built yet. Can someone put in an application to?
Yes,
to
they're currently taking
Taking
applications.
applications.
So the information is on our website. It's also on the fence at the project,
Okay, thank you.
specifically to the Dunellen station.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Back to the school children multiplier, I'm just curious if there are any outliers to what the study showed where some towns are experiencing higher than that, and if we know if they are, why they would be.
I had actually, the information that we have seen and we've been doing, you're working in towns like Bloomfield, Belleville, we had done a bunch in Jersey City. Most of those multipliers are actually multipliers are lower than what we're seeing. They're less than. You're seeing much less school students coming out of the transit-oriented, especially the transit-oriented developments. As I mentioned before, the unit sizes that these developers are building are small. You know, they're not anything like the apartments that we all may have seen growing up. To have a one-bedroom, more than 600 square feet is rare now. 600, 650 square feet. So most of them are coming down. If I find the sheet, I will give you some examples of what I have seen actually after I made a bunch of calls. So, yeah, sure.
I'm gonna leave.
So you've got, the townhouses are, I'm assuming, way bigger than 800 square foot.
The townhouses, I think the townhouses are not one bedroom. So.
Okay, so we are coming to an end in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to just, and I saw one hand raised, but I'll lead with a question. A lot of concerns that I hear from residents is the density and the increase of density in the downtown and livable space. Can we, for public knowledge, let them know, or how do we state that, that increased density for the residents who want the bookshops, the coffee shops, and the out, the little boutique shops, that increase in density is really what's going to, with the expendable income, attract the type of businesses that residents who currently live here desperately want. Could someone speak to that?
Absolutely. I mean, you build it and they will come. I mean, that analogy is you need to support the businesses by having people downtown. You need the space to attract new businesses. You need people to live downtown that will go not during the go morning work and night. And then now when people working from home, they'll be around more often. So you're going to see more of a trend of that. So by having this opportunity and by having the new development downtown and further development, this will only enhance, support, and build upon downtown Dunellen and the whole borough of Dunellen.
Thank you. We have time for just one last question. So I saw a hand in the room. Did I not? Is it from back there?
Yeah, well, I can go. First of all, everybody I thought did a really great job. This was a great thing to hold for us to meet the professionals that are working on behalf of the borough. Dan, I think this might be directed to you. For the pilot payments, that includes a portion to the school. Is that just a flat percentage for the art color pilot that's going to the school, or is it based on the actual number of students, or what is it? What was that based on?
That we exempted the land, right?
We did, but I believe
Right.
that minimum charge that Scott, you're referring to, that the borough gets regardless of sort of the success of the project, I believe that was a per student amount. So I don't remember what it was, this was many, many years ago, but X dollars per student in the project is part of the formula. The formula also included, I think, why dollars per resident relative to the municipal budget charges. And I think it also included a component to make sure we also accounted for the taxes that the project was generating before the project had been ultimately rebuilt. Is that all?
Yeah,
right?
Scott, it doesn't come in pre-allocated. It's just to establish a pilot amount so that the borough overall expense in all those categories it doesn't become a loser, a financial loser. So that money would still come in the same way as a pilot payment, and then it would be through a shared services process or something if it were to be allocated.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering how would it get to the board? And does the board tell us the number of students, or if it's on a per student basis, are they telling us the number of students? How is that
Well,
determined?
I think what Chuck was referring to, when we did that, we wanted to make sure that the developer was paying a minimum amount of money to cover the cost of the new students. Not that money was going to the schools, it was coming into the borough as a pilot.
Okay.
Now, once that project is built, the schools will be able to tell you how many school children are coming out of that development, and if the borough so chooses, as Matt touched on briefly, there are ways to be able to get monies through shared services and whatnot from the borough to the schools. But remember, the way I look at that is the schools are going to put forth their budget, and it's going to get approved, and it's going to get funded through taxes. Whether or not we're making sure that we're assisting the taxpayers, whether it's from your borough tax payment side or your school tax payment side, you're being covered as a taxpayer by the pilot payment that's coming in.
All right. Yeah. And then Matt, as far as the RAP for the Dunellen stations, when do we expect that to kick in?
Sure. So that bond issue was set up to be done in two tranches, a tax exempt piece and a taxable piece. The tax exempt piece, we actually got notice from the developer maybe 2 months ago or so that they wanted to close the tax exempt piece in the fourth quarter of this year, so basically in the next couple weeks. But earlier this week, we got a revised notice saying they'd like to close it in the second quarter of 2022. So the tax exempt piece, we expect second quarter of 2022. Taxable piece is likely about a year after that.
Okay, with that, I'll just conclude with Dunellen's on the up. I think we can see that with lastly, I'll state this too. Thank you to the Dunellen Downtown Management Organization and its volunteers. Thank you to the Dunellen Arts and Culture Commission and its volunteers, because as a volunteer organizations that are subcommittees of the municipality, look at the downtown. You see the lights, the planters, the winter scenes paint. They have done a magnificent job on helping us revitalize and beautify our downtown. And it's all on fundraising, and it's all on volunteer hours. That's what makes Dunellen the Miracle Mile. That's why we're so great. So let's give them a round of applause. So just in conclusion, we're on the up, we're redeveloping. We have to do this to sustain Dunellen. We're going to do it that keeps Dunellen's legacy. We're going to do it in a way that keeps Dunellen quaint. So I've always said we must protect and respect our tradition while we engage in the future. We have to do this to move forward. So I want to thank our volunteer panel. So just let's put that on the record. Volunteer this evening, our panel. Because this is a very important topic, and I want this to be a conversation that as a community we go forward together, because the success is only going to be based upon what we all give to this process. So thank you all for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause.